It's just been, I gotta say, this has been quite the season. Season 4 has been a roller coaster for me. I'm not gonna lie. I get very excited by what I see all the time, and on the same on the same token, I'm exhausted. I'm kind of tired, and it's just because honestly, the last 3 4 months, Andrew and I have been doing this almost 7 days a week. We get little breaks here and there, but it's basically all the time. And it's because we've been wanting to just give this the push that it deserves and that it needs, because we can see all the good that's happening out there. We can see all the ripples that are being made in people's lives. It's inspiring. It really is. And I've never been so happy to be so fucking tired. I just wanted to throw that out there. I did want to say very quickly, thank you to all of our new Patreon members. We're now over 170 members, and that's super useful and very, very helpful. And we really appreciate it for sure, especially right now. As everybody knows, we're building the community, we're building the audience, and hopefully building the interests of corporate advertisers so they can help fund the many endeavors that we have in mind. But it's huge. And what's nice about it too is that it's really filling up the group discussions. It's so nice to be able to have these group Zooms and see 10 or 20 people at a time just coming online to shoot the breeze with us, to ask questions, to share their own journey, or just to introduce themselves. Some of them don't even talk. Some of them just sit and listen, and they'll do that for like the first 2 or 3 weeks, and then suddenly they'll say something, and then the next time they're on video, and then by month 3 or month 4, we actually know them quite well. It's interesting to watch this community build, and I really enjoy the conversations that have been coming into my life as a result. And so I guess I just wanted to start this episode of Dualistic Unity Raw with a bit of appreciation.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think we've said it before, but it doesn't go unnoticed and unsaid with how much the group chats impact the podcast as well. Like, I don't think everyone who listens to the podcast recognizes how much of the insights that we talk about are like almost carryover from those groups. Like, we'll dig into it on the groups, and maybe it's me and Ray going back and forth. Maybe it's us and 4 other Patreon members just kind of circling around certain points. And then we will a lot of times dig into it in an episode and be like, that was really cool. I want to dig into this a little bit more. And so we will. And so I really appreciate the ability to talk with so many people about some deeper stuff that not everyone's usually willing to talk about, or gets very uncomfortable as soon as, you dig, even put your toe in the water, people start getting uncomfortable. So it's awesome for us to be able to have a group to chat with as often as we do about, all of these things. But yeah, so very much tons of appreciation for those groups. But yeah, it's been this season has been a lot of fun. It's very funny. At first I was like hesitant about us doing seasons. I was like, is that a normal thing for podcasts to do? I mean, fuck normal, but you know what I mean? And it's funny now looking at everything and how like every season has been super symbolic. And this season has very much been us like just going balls to the wall, like putting everything we have into it and really digging in and getting deep, but also expanding the conversation as well. And just putting a ton of energy into it and building a base that I think, and we've seen now with people reaching out to help us with things. Now we have, I don't know, 5-10 people helping us with clips and sharing things like that. Like, that is incredible. Like, that we couldn't be more appreciative of that. And I did a little clipping tutorial, just walking through how I do clips and things. So we have that now as a recording. So if anyone else out there is interested, I kind of walk it through in 45 minutes. We had a couple Patreon members who were nice enough to join that, and they think I was doing something for them. Meanwhile, they're helping me out because they're asking questions along the way, things that I may have glazed over or went too quickly with. So they very much informed that tutorial. So we have that now. So for anyone interested in, even if it's just trying it out. Even if you just want to get into video editing and you want a space in which you can practice or something, like use us as your sandbox to get some reps in there. Because yeah, we very much appreciate anyone who can offer to help. And we know that's your free time that you're cutting out of your day. So we couldn't be more appreciative for all of that. And there's going to be a point, and that's the thing too, is I guess a lot of people are doing it for fun because they want to, because it is cool. Like I think it's cool being able to listen back to one of our episodes and then flip out a bit I thought was impactful and then put it on social media for a bunch of other people to see. Like it's cool to be able to have so many mediums with which we can get this message out there. And as it expands, as we're able to hire more people, it's going to be cool just to see that grow more and more and more. And there's going to be a point where the growth, because a lot of it is going back into being invested into different ways of marketing and advertising and getting more things out there and clipping up more of the episode to smaller YouTube videos or social media clips. Like once we hit a certain point, the growth is going to take off even more so than it is right now. Because right now it's very much like building that base, building that community. But then there's going to be a, I don't know what it's called, like point of critical mass or something like that, where it just everything, it's almost like right now we're still trekking uphill, and then we get to a point and then it starts going, like we're going downhill, but in a good way. Just like everything gets easier, and then the conversation's going to expand, and it's going to be, I don't know, it's going to be cool when that point hits. But yeah, I'm very much enjoying the process of doing all this and putting as much into all of this as we do, because we're talking on here at least 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, 5 days a week. But then on top of that, we're doing all sorts of stuff outside of that just to continue to build that the presence and communication and community and everything. So it's been a lot of fun building it, certainly for the last 4 months being full time in it. But likewise, definitely like prioritize. I'm realizing, because there's a while where I was like, all right, all I need is 5, 6 hours, getting up at 4 a.m. very consistently. And now I'm like getting halfway through the day and like, I probably could have used an extra hour or two of sleep. So maybe we'll cut back on whatever I was going to do in the morning and just sleep a little bit more. But always finding that balance.
I would like to suggest the beauty of the mid-afternoon nap. I just want to throw that in there. It's taken me a lifetime to truly appreciate. I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been Jeremy Irons, who said the nap is just downright sophisticated. And it is. It's beautiful. It's like an extra touch to the day. It's fantastic. You get through half your day, you stop, you nap for like a half hour, 45 minutes, you get up feeling refreshed, and you got the rest of the day. It's fantastic. So that's something I wanted to suggest very quickly. I also wanted to mention, it's difficult for me to speak today a little bit. And it's because I was stupid last night. I went out and drank alcohol. And when I got home, I was feeling really good and hungry, and I had a bagel. And so I was eating my bagel, and I also had a little bit of my tongue. And I am not as tasty as I'd like to think I am, but my tongue kind of hurts today. And so I just want to mention it's a little difficult as I'm talking because it still stings a little bit. That all said, going back to what Andrew had mentioned in terms of the growth of this community, I'm really excited because in season 5, which is coming up towards the end of April, we're going to be doing something else. And we've been talking about this on Patreon. We've discussed it a little bit on here. We're going to be introducing in-person groups that can be hosted and facilitated by members of our community, where if they have a space and they want to have people come by, chew on an episode of community topics with them, or just shoot the breeze about existence, basically do what we're doing, but with people in their community. We want to try and make that possible. We want to make a place on the website where those groups can be listed, where if you live in that area, you can get in touch with them and say, hey, I'd love to be a part of this group. So that way we can actually start coming together, because I think that's the point. It's one thing to have these conversations online, and I'm super appreciative that we can, because I don't know if we would have been able to find each other quite so efficiently or as quickly. There's that tongue thing again, without the internet. I'm glad it's here. But now that we've started to make connections all over the world, and I encourage you to go to the website and check out the community map if you're wondering, because there are pins all over the globe at this point. It's really exciting to see. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was asking, like, well, what kind of a crowd do you have out here in the UK? And I went and I looked, and we've had over 4,000 downloads in the UK just this month alone. Just in this month alone. So there is an audience out there. There are people that you can connect with in the UK, Europe, South Africa, Australia. We're all over the place at this point because we're out there. There's way more of us than we think there are. I just posted an old video from 2005 onto my TikTok. And of course, 2005 Ray is very popular compared to 2023 Ray. And the reason is because I had all kinds of concepts and I was just kind of spinning through, and it's easy for people to grab onto any one thing. And so there's argument and there's all of that. But a lot of people just in the last day have been saying the same thing, specifically this: I wish there was a community where I could talk about this kind of thing. And I've been super happy to be able to respond. I have a pleasant surprise for you and direct them towards the podcast and everything that's forming here. That's all I think that's all this is about, is just introducing the conversation, spreading the conversation, because it doesn't exist anywhere else, or at least it doesn't without some serious pitfalls. So on that level, this couldn't be easier. But that said, it takes a lot of work to get something like this going. It takes a lot of work to push this boulder up the hill. So we really do appreciate all of the help and all of the support and all of the messages that we've been getting on the side from people on Instagram or Discord, just cheering us on and saying, like, this is great, keep up the great work. Like, that means a lot. It really does. We'd do it regardless. We have been for a while, but it does get the word out, and it does tell people that there is a conversation that maybe they weren't aware of, or not even aware that you're having it, which is always kind of fun to introduce them to that. Oh, hey, did you know that I'm all into existence and thinking about everything? You didn't know that. Well, welcome to the club, and let's start talking.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to be able to point people to the community, because there are, like, every time you post about something like that and it hits home for someone, because a lot of people do think about these things, but they, then they go back into their community, their family, with their friends or wherever. And people, there's a lot of resistance to it as well. And so sometimes you can get caught up in thinking you're the only one thinking about it or talking about it because no one around you is, but that's, it's not the case. We're talking about it all the time and talking about it without the distortion that comes with believing in it or trying to get people, not that we don't want people involved, but like wanting people, like having that sort of undertone to everything. Like, I really want you involved in this conversation. Here's how, here's why you should be, et cetera, et cetera. And like, I do understand all of the benefits to it, but there's a difference with that. And I think a lot of people in the past, there's always been something that undercuts the message, like the rawness of the reality of being here now and the depth of that. Like, there's always some other fucking bullshit on top of just the basis of, you're just reality. This is just it. You're not what you think you are. And there's so much to that, but there's such a sort of simplicity to the recognition, but then the shitload of depth to that. And there's so much complexity in our reality right now that we couldn't possibly think it was that. Like, simple, straightforward, at least in certain ways. It's simple, but it's not easy, but it's simple, whatever it is. But everything always gets distorted with this message, like it always has. There's some sort of belief, some sort of even a pointing to past people who have talked about it. Even that is a way that people avoid it. Like, oh, you sound really a lot like this guy. Oh, you sound like Ram Dass or Krishnamurti or Alan Watts or Neville Goddard or whatever. Like, I'm always getting stuff like that. It's like, oh, like, how many of their books have you read? And it's like, I haven't read any of those fuckers' books. Like, I've picked it, Krishnamurti and Alan Watts. I've listened to a lot of Alan Watts' speeches, obviously, but Like that's just another way that people avoid the responsibility of being it. They're like, oh, it sounds a lot like this. Oh, it sounds like a lot like this philosophy. Oh, it sounds like this philosophy. It's like, this is the basis of reality that we're talking about. It's not a philosophy until you make it into one, like so many people have, because they don't, there's still that desire to be something in reality. There's still that desire to be something separate from reality. Like I don't know. It's been hard as a society to grasp onto the letting go, grasp onto the letting go, grasp onto the ability to let go. You know, recognize that you can let go of being something. That when you're not something, you're everything. When you're not being something separate from reality, you're just reality and you're everything. And that's just something we haven't explored. But you know, to those who are beginning to explore, because there is a depth to the recognition, but there's certainly a lot of people I think have recognized bits and pieces of it and are starting to, and then they get sucked into some Dolores Cannon bullshit or something. And it's like, you don't have to settle upon a belief system. You don't need it, but you know, it's sometimes uncomfortable to not have something to hold on to, but there's I don't know, there's a willingness to get there that we're exploring, I guess.
That's so interesting, because it's the degradation that we have to watch out for all the time, like all the time. And so I just wanted to say very quickly, I just had a very similar conversation to what you were talking about, in that somebody was messaging me on that video from 2005, and they're like, so what you're saying is that we're all one, there's no separation, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, it's all you, that kind of thing. It's not that we're all one so much as you're all, and so on and so forth. And they were getting really agitated with me. And I'm like, it's always been the case. Like, it's always been the case. This is all we've ever been communicating. And they're like, well, you're not saying anything new. This is something that people have been saying for thousands of years across numerous different cultures. And I just wrote back, I'm like, kind of the point though, no? Like, that's what I'm saying, is that doesn't matter where you're from or what time period you're in, this insight is there. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's not like somebody came up with it. Reality's there. It's not like, Sir Isaac Newton invented gravity. But that's how we tend to look at it, right? It's like, oh my God, somebody had an insight. It must come from their location. Therefore, they own it. It's like, no, they had an insight about reality, which means it could happen anywhere. There's reality. We don't see it that way, but it's super obvious. Like, it's super obvious. That's kind of what I'm having fun with at this point. It's so interesting that there was this long phase where integration with the current mentality seemed so very difficult, coming from this perspective, recognizing the ego, recognizing the pitfalls of investing in the idea that you need to evaluate yourself at all, right? All of that, you see all of that, and you're like, how do I interact with this at all? And so you're trying to figure out ways to word it. You're trying to figure out ways to bring it across, and then finally you recognize, oh, it's actually not about that. It's actually really obvious. It's been obvious this whole time. It's just that we're too busy looking at ourselves to see it. Somebody brought up the Quran with me this morning, and they had asked a question like, yeah, okay, so what do you make of the quote that Allah is as close to us as our jugular? I'm like, that makes quite a bit of sense, actually. It's your jugular. Like, it doesn't seem like it's really hard to understand. We've talked before about the 99 names of Allah, all being descriptions for basically any facet of your personality, any part of yourself, right? All that stuff, it's all right there. It's just that at some point somebody went, I don't understand that, but it sounds really important. In fact, it sounds so important that we need to make sure everybody looks at it as important. And so it became an important concept, and then it became structured and complicated, because now you need to have certain ceremonies and mantras and exercises to remember that concept, right? Where it could have just, I guess that's the question, right? Is it really just about the ever-present acknowledgement that we don't know anything out of our own existence, that this is really it. This is it. Is it just that acknowledgement that getting so caught up in narratives is what pulls us out of reality itself? If we could just keep that in the common discussion of our species, how much would that change? Just that one recognition that your value can't be measured, you're not divided. It doesn't matter how carried away you get in the thoughts in your head, that isn't reality. That sounds like a solid foundation. You don't really need much in the way of like ceremony and statues and bells and incense and shit. You really don't. It just sounds like common sense that keeps you grounded. It's just, I think we've forgotten the power of that very simple insight. And so we don't pass it on. Instead, we write a book about it and we go like, this is the word of God, instead of making it our own words.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the tools to remember these recognitions. Like, as we cling to those tools are going to be thoughts. And so remembering the recognition that the thoughts aren't reality, in order to remember that, you think you need to remember it using thoughts. And then it's like this vicious cycle of relying upon the thing that is never reality. And so it's kind of like, I don't know, part of it, and this is, I think, why it's such a deep-seated illusion. It's kind of a catch-22. Like, it's not something you can remember, but don't forget, your thoughts aren't reality. And it's like, well, how the fuck am I supposed to do that without using my thoughts? It's like, you don't have to. And it's a letting go of that too. But then, then we get caught up in trying to remember things, or as you said, like using tools or writing things down, or using mantras, or creating a fucking religion about it, so that we don't forget that what you think, your idea of yourself isn't you. The thoughts inside of your head aren't reality. They're just your perception. Like, we've gotten so caught up in thinking that we can't forget that it actually became like a wolf in sheep's clothing. That desire to not forget what we are became an idea of what we are. And that's not the reality of what we are, because what we are is what's left beyond the desire to utilize those ideas, or the reliance upon those ideas. And so, yeah, it's just the constant recognition that your thoughts aren't reality, but it's not something to remember. It's just like a each and every moment recognition. But a lot of people haven't even had the space to recognize it once. And so they don't even know what they're trying to remember, but they're trying to remember something. It's like they don't even know what it is. And so they're just pointing to all of these other things they think it is, but it's just the recognition. All of these recognitions are always there. And I like that one that Isaac Newton didn't invent gravity. I think people forget that sometimes. Honestly, I think they do. Like, it came from him. It's like, no, it was always there. It was always happening. He just looked at it without a belief about what it was. He just saw it for what it was. Just like we're talking about being reality. Like, yeah, no shit. Other people have recognized it. It's always been you. You're always going in and out of the recognition. But they didn't invent Buddhism, didn't invent these recognitions. They just saw them with clearer eyes, I guess.
Mindfulness did not start with Buddha. Yeah. No, I get it for sure. Like, that's exactly the point, though. But we think about ourselves in terms of being divided in our ego and so on and so forth. And it's not just that we think of it that way. We've been steeped in it for generations. Like, you're born into the world and everyone around you is insane, thinking that they're in reality while they're really just perpetuating this illusion. And so they come to you and they're like, illusion, bank on it, play with it, live in it. This is what it is. And nobody's around you telling you like, yeah, maybe don't take that quite so seriously, that kind of thing. And if you're lucky, you've got a few people who do. And that's when you're lucky. But generations upon generations of stupid shit as a result of that stupid shit. So, right. So you got to remember, it's not just that people are divided, it's that those divided, confused, scared people go out and traumatize other people who might have been doing just fine. And then generations later, they don't even remember what their ancestors used to look at the world as. See, that's the saddest part about all of this, is that we keep reaching back. We keep trying to look back towards where we came from for some indication of the mentality that we lost, because we recognize that back there, we weren't quite so lost. But we can't do that because back there, we didn't think about ourselves to the same degree. So we're still thinking about ourselves, but we're looking backwards now. So we're not actually changing anything, because as we said, with the experience of awareness, you can't get back to it. This is the tragic journey that occasionally happens. I think we talked about this on Patreon, about coming to this point of recognition, whether it's through, near-death experience, moment of insight, psychedelics, whatever it might be. And suddenly you have a quote unquote ego death. In other words, you put your ego down for a bit and you look at what's actually there and you marvel and you're in awe. And then all of a sudden your ego comes back. And that's just fine. But it's the recognition of the marveling, right? That there's something there. That's really all it's about. But there's a journey. It's not just about getting to it and going, aha, I've seen it, right? But this is what our brain does. It's like, aha, I've seen it. And then we'll say things like, oh yeah, I remember seeing that, as it slips farther and farther away. Or we try to see it again based on our memory of what it was, and it slips farther and farther away. And so now we have nothing left but to identify as someone who's seen it. And we settle for that cheap egotistical high instead of seeing it, which is always here and now. It's always new because it's always now. It's never what it was. And as long as you're trying to make it what it was, you're never getting to it. That's the tragedy of that whole loop. You see it, and then you try to remember what it looked like, and you get farther and farther away from seeing it again now.
It really is sort of a shame, like how quickly we settle upon, oh, I know what that is. Oh yeah, I've been there. I've seen Unity. I've recognized it, and that's it. Like, we think that the surface level seeing it or recognizing it is it. Like we're seeing, it's like seeing a fucking iceberg and seeing the tip and being like, oh, I know how big. Yeah, it's kind of big. Wasn't that impressive. It was like, I don't know, 10 feet out of the water. It's not that. And it's like there's fucking 1,000 feet under the water. And that's what we do. Like, that's us seeing it because, it makes us feel good. We're like, oh yeah, I've been there. I've seen it. Now I'm going to, make all these courses about how to see it and what I saw and blah, 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 and all that stuff. Meanwhile, like, each and every moment that they're doing it is it. And now they're just clinging to a concept. They just made up a concept about what they thought it was. It's the same with any religion now. It's like someone saw it with genuine clarity, and then everyone was like, they saw it. What did they see? I think they saw that. And it's a concept. Again, like we conceptualize everything, and it happens so quick. And each and every, like, we're constantly thinking that that's what it was. Like, we even look back to times in our life when we're more at peace, and that idea of what that was is taking us further from the ability to do so right now, because nothing, like, we're in the same now, we're in the same moment, we have the same capacity to recognize it here and now, but get caught up in the concept and what it means, and striving to be in a place that we can't possibly be because we strive to be somewhere that isn't here now. But we're always trying to do that. And I guess it comes down to our desire for comfort, our desire for certainty, and to be able to point and be like, I am someone who saw that. And then makes us feel better. Then we're able to find some success. And there's so many people who have like seen a little itty bit of it and then been able to have a shitload of what our society deems success through that, just because they felt relatively a little bit freer. And then they create things that does way more harm than good, because then they have a bunch of people looking at them in a certain way, trying to see what they saw that they're not even seeing anymore because they're looking back at it thinking that it still is what it is. Meanwhile, it's a concept to them. So they're looking, all these people are looking to someone who has conceptualized something that is always available to everyone. It's like fucking selling air back to people. Seriously. It's like just closing a lid to an empty water bottle. You're like, here, $100. It's this is it. This is what I saw. And they're like, oh, this is what you saw. And it's just not it. And that's what it's like. And it's available each and every moment. The moment that you're buying the thing is it. and yet they're still able to do so because we're so afraid, so confused, and so insecure and trying to feel better. We're just trying to feel better, and we'll take anything we can get to feel even just a tiny bit better.
Nice. And I think it's largely because we're not really modeled anything else for the most part. Really. I mean, so often in one-on-one sessions, which I offer, if anybody's wondering, because I know quite a few people have asked me, do you offer? I do. I just want to mention. I don't offer very often, but I do. In those one-on-one sessions, often the people I talk to will say just this one thing. It makes me feel better that you seem to have gone through some similar shit and that you're okay. And that's largely all we're trying to be, is okay. Like, we're just on our own journey, and I've gone through some shit, and Andrew's gone through some shit, and as a result of that, we've come out the other side, and we're still doing okay. We still have our balance, and I think that's it. That's all we're trying to offer is I guess the suggestion, possibly the possibility that you're going to be okay, even though you may not feel like it. You're going to be okay. It's just a long and hard journey, and we'd like to be here for as much of it as we can be. And if we can't be, then we're going to try and make it so somebody else has the chance to be there for as much of it as they can be. And I think that's it. It's just coming together, because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the example that we don't always have to be afraid, that not everybody is afraid, that not everybody's going to throw you under the bus just to get themselves ahead because they recognize that you're them, that they're throwing themselves under the bus. It's just that. And the more we do that, the more we recognize that in ourselves, the more we're an example of that possibility for people who may have never had the opportunity to see it otherwise. And I think that's it. We're just introducing another option. You don't have to be afraid.
Yeah, because as you said, I think a lot of people don't see it necessarily as an option. They don't see it even as a thing that could be possible. Like, as soon as they even, dip their toe in or test the waters out for a bit, they got someone coming up to them and being like, well, how is this going to make you a living? Or how is this going to benefit society? Or blah, 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 blah. And everyone is so caught up in certain narratives, and it's really not about the existing situation and immediately changing that, because it's the embodiment, the product of a certain mentality. It's, again, like I've said many times, like focusing on the branches and the leaves. Like, I get so many comments and in Q&As, like, how can, you say nothing is good or bad. Well, what about murdering babies? I'm like, why the fuck do you want to murder babies? Like, what is driving people to do so? It's like, I'm not discounting the atrocity of murdering babies. What I'm saying is that that is a product. The desire to do so is the product of believing that you're not also the baby, like believing that you're something separate from reality, and so is the baby. And so, you have so much inside of you that's been kind of instilled into you based on the overarching mentality that we're existing within. So that is driven you to act and do heinous things. But does pointing that out, does bitching and moaning about it change that mentality that drove the person to do so, to do something awful, any atrocity in our reality? Does that change it? Or is there an underlying mentality that can't be forced to change. It has to change through you. And so a part of that is letting go of the judgment that comes with labeling things as good or bad, believing that, oh, that's an objectively bad thing, which I would never do. There's always that comes along with it. There's always the, well, I would never do that. What do you mean? I couldn't do that. I'm a good person. Like, that's it. That's an aspect of the mentality that is driving those types of things to happen. So you're actually reinforcing the thing that's causing the baby murders, and you're not even taking any responsibility for it. You are feeding the trunk and the roots of that tree that perceives division. And one of those branches is all of the atrocities. A bunch of those branches is all of the atrocities that you say are so objectively bad, which I don't disagree with, but there is a difference in trying to focus on those versus focusing on the trunk. And it's tough to do both. It's very difficult to do both, because if you're focusing on one, you're discounting the other. If you're focusing on the branches, you're discounting where they're coming from, because you think they're it. You're going to focus on the thing you think is it. And so if you believe that the mentality isn't it, if you think that the killing is it, you're going to focus on that, and you're not going to focus anything on the shifting mentality. But in order to change that, it's a longer term shift. But focusing on the trunk, it's tough to focus on all the branches a ton when you recognize there's a root, because it's going to take a lot of, energy and attention away from the shift in the root. And it actually is counteractive to that, because, judgment, opinion, preference, all of those things are involved with focusing on those branches and leaves. But that's what you have to drop in order to shift the overarching mentality that perceives division.
Now that's interesting. We tend to, it's so interesting. We always look at things in one way and we forget that they're experienced in another. And I think it's because we forget, like, one of the foundational, I guess, laws in science, or one of the foundational understandings in science, even one of the foundational fucking challenges in science, is the fact that we cannot observe awareness. We can only observe how awareness behaves. That's all we can do. And so we get caught up in the behavior and forget that the awareness itself is having a subjective experience that is driving that behavior. And so when we talk about atrocities and things like that, we tend to look at the behavior. We look at what's happening to the other person, to the victim, to the person that's being hurt. And we forget that the subjective experience of the person who is doing the hurting is still the subjective experience of only themselves. Somebody brought this up the other day in terms of another atrocity. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm raping myself. And I asked him, like, where does that kind of violence come from, if not from a place of self-hatred? To the person doing it, they're hurting themselves because they're hurting. And we look at the violence and the repercussions of what they're doing in the world around us, and we forget that to them, they're still hurting themselves, because it's all they know is themselves, in the same way it's all we know, right? And so that's where that comes from, is that division, that inability to recognize other people as yourself, because you're so focused on the idea that you hate, the idea that you're afraid of someone judging, the idea that you cling to for a sense of value or power or control or any of that stuff. And that's where that comes from, is that mentality. But we look at the damage and we go, that's got to stop. It's like, that comes from somewhere. That comes from somewhere. You can't just look at one half and go, this is stuff I don't like. If you knew what was happening in that person's head, you wouldn't like that either.
It really is fascinating how much we don't look beyond the surface actions, like beyond the violent actions. And no one's taken a second to be like, but that's coming from somewhere. It's the same with addiction. We look at all of the addictive actions and no one's like, yeah, but they're clearly suffering a ton. They're clearly avoiding something. Maybe it's not a chemical in their brain. Maybe they have a shitty experience that they're trying to avoid somehow. Maybe they hate themselves and they're enacting that hatred on another iteration of themselves. Because what's the thing you asked ChatGPT that it said something like, I need to be aware of my environment, or like there is an interconnection to me and my environment. It said something like that. Like it there has to
I
and
wish I
I totally
remembered.
yeah, I don't remember either. And I'm trying to think of it, but there's a recognition that to be aware, your awareness of your environment is also you. And there was like something that it recognized through that we discount. Like you can't be like have an experience without seeing yourself as your environment or something like that. And so everyone always is. And there's the perspective that it isn't you, but it still is. And so you hate yourself, so you're enacting that hatred on what you deem to be other people, but you're always enacting it upon yourself, and you're doing it internally to yourself while you're doing it externally to other people. And it's like almost everything is a mirror of that. And so, but we only, as you were saying, we only look at the external impact. And like there's an equal and opposite, or equal and equal impact internally that person is experiencing. And I guess that's like, that takes more responsibility. It seems like more work. It seems like more of a process to focus on that, and like all the shit that person went throughout their entire life. Like even looking at any serial killer, like anything they went through their entire life is way harder for society to look at and say, oh, that came from somewhere, versus just looking at the enactment, the actions that they took as an expression of that entire process, of their entire life, of their entire experience that was being expressed through the atrocious actions. And so we only look at those. We're like, oh, monster. Like they were bred by a society, by a mentality. That's the monster right there. And it's being enacted through everyone, because it becomes us in a way, almost, but not. It's like that we're so powerful that we can actually embody a mentality that is like so far in the other direction of the reality of what we are. And then that's enacted upon, but everyone's reinforcing it. It's just not as many people are taking the atrocious actions, but those are products of it, no differently than, hoarding and fearing judgment is kind of products of it too. Like they're all products of the perception of division being truth.
It's uncomfortable. That's really what it is. There's a line from a Nine Inch Nails song. It's probably my favorite Nine Inch Nails song. It's called Only. And he's talking about going inside, and he's like, now I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be, and I can see things I know I really shouldn't see, and now I know why things aren't as pretty on the inside. And that's very much the point, is that we have unlimited access to every perception of ourself that could exist. Now you can have those exposed to you through different life events. You can go through the experiences of life and find all kinds of different perceptions of yourself, and you can learn from that. Or you can sit down and explore your mind. But in your mind, there be monsters. Let's just say, right? This is why, nightmares and whatnot, they all exist within the potential of the mind. All of the possible potential perceptions of yourself, where you hate yourself, where you're worthless, where nobody will ever love you, that's all in there. That's all in there. It's just, it takes a certain degree of commitment to really get to how deep that goes. And usually that commitment comes through people just abusing you over your life, rather than you taking the time to actually explore everything that is within your consciousness. And so, because we don't want to do that. If I'm sitting here enjoying my life, I don't want to sit down and think about what it would take for me to become a serial murderer. but it's the willingness to go down into those deep, dark places within our awareness that gives us the ability to recognize where those deep, dark places come from and how they're being embodied and how we can empathize with those who are caught in them. But if we're never willing to recognize that they're within us, then we're never willing to recognize where they come from. We just focus on the people and we go, no, I would never do that. And all of that insight is gone. And it's just because, frankly, we're afraid to go looking in the deeper, darker aspects of ourselves. So on that token, it's super selfish.
Yeah, because even in the avoidance of looking at that, it's like that stems from a deep-seated recognition that it could be us. Like we know it deep down. And so we're avoiding it because if we didn't have that deep down knowing, what would be the issue with it? What do you mean? Of course I could explore that, but we just avoid. And we avoid so many things like that. Like that's why we avoid it, because doesn't it make sense that if you weren't afraid of it, what's the issue with avoid, or what's the issue with looking into it? What's the issue with digging into it? There is none. Unless you're avoiding something that deep down you almost know. And that's what we're like, that's what we're always doing. And it goes very deep into the recognition of the reality of what you are. It's like deep down, somewhere in us, we all know that because it's the reality of what we are, reality of what you are. Everyone knows this, and we're always doing so many things to avoid it. And there's so many things available to us to make that avoidance easier. But there wouldn't be anything, there wouldn't be the desire to avoid anything or the unwillingness to look at it if we didn't know it somehow, somewhere, in some way. And it goes for every iteration of me, every iteration of everything. But it's the willingness to explore that and the acceptance almost of that being the reality, that I could have been that. You know, all of the worst of humanity, the best of the best. I could have been all of them. I was all of them. I have been all of them. But we're not willing to look at that because we have such a little itty bitty idea of ourselves that's so fucking fragile that we couldn't possibly be that thing. But we know somewhere that it could be. And we all have that inside of it. And that's the thing that we're where shame comes from, is the hiding of aspects of ourself. It's within all of us. And we've gotten to a point that in our collective mind, we have certain thoughts and we're like shameful of the thoughts. But it's half of them, all of them aren't even coming from you. They're reality you're hearing. But and especially, God, things like religion with even thinking a lustful thought and you don't confess, you're going to hell. Like that was one of the things that I remember freshman year of high school. I was in a religion class. I've talked about this teacher and guy before, but I had a bunch of my friends in the class and we just ask them about all the absurd things, like all the things that could be mortal sins. And we were like, fuck. So you're saying if I pictured someone naked and then I didn't confess, it's a mortal sin. I'm going to hell forever. And so it insinuates that we have control over our mind, that it's your mind, your thoughts, better think good ones, else you're going to hell. So that's going to make people go fucking crazy with their mind. Like reinforce, because then you're trying to control your mind. You're trying to control something that you're like, well, this is mine. So all the thoughts are yours. And they're coming from, the wells of reality hitting you, because it's not your mind, not the idea of your mind. It's yours, the reality of you, which is everyone. and so they just fucking reinforce that. But yeah, I mean, it's wild to think that you could have control over it. But yeah, it's that unwillingness to look at it because it's all in there. And that's what could connect us, but we or make it easier to recognize, but we just suppress it because we don't want to admit that, because we have a very fragile image of ourselves that we're doing everything we possibly can to maintain.
Because what does it mean about me? That's it. That's what catches us. All of a sudden we'll have just a terrible thought as we think about it, right? We're like, oh, it's a terrible thought. Why would I have that thought? What does that mean about me? And we're done. That's exactly it. All of a sudden, it's like it has to identify you because you just became aware of something that was damaging, or something, a perception that wasn't necessarily loving and kind in the way that you would like to identify. Just because you suddenly had an idea, or you had a perception where you could steal something or hurt someone or be selfish, it's just a perception. It's just one option out of an infinite amount. Like when you, I don't know if anybody listening to this uses Photoshop or pretty much anything that uses the color spectrum. Now, there are, I think it's like 64 million colors typically available to you, just different shades that are almost not even noticeable in how different they are. And that still has a limit on how many shades there are. There is no limit to how many shades you have in your awareness for the difference between the observer and the observed. There's no limit to the amount of perceptions that you have available to you in terms of who you are and your relationship with reality. None. Keep that in mind. That's true all the time. That's true all the time. It doesn't mean anything about you except that maybe you're limitless.
Yeah, it's almost like every iteration of every person is showing you a potential, what you could be. Like, they're all inside of your mind, and everyone's showing you always an example of what you could be, of what's possible. We're all pointing each other towards that reality, but it's our idea of ourself that cuts us off from recognizing that it could possibly be. But people get, they get little tastes of it. They get little samples of dropping the idea of themselves. And even, I guess this is kind of, for me, what early on, before I was doing any sort of social media stuff, one of the first recognitions I had, like during COVID, I got into just like some fitness YouTube guys I like. They were doing different recipes and workouts, and I was just like at home workouts because we couldn't go to the gym or anything. And one dude posted like a day in life vlog, and it was super like low effort, super just, but I was interested in it because I was interested in him and I wanted to see how he lived his life. And then I got to the end of it and I was like, wait a second, that wasn't that hard to do. And that wasn't that much effort. And he just kind of walked around saying like, all right, this is what I do when I wake up. This is what I eat for breakfast. And it was like, I was interested, like, wait a second, I could probably do that. And so we're always being shown that. But if I had such a strong idea of being someone who didn't do that, then it would cut me off. So with no idea, it's like you're always that blank canvas going into each and every situation. But as you restrict yourself, as you see yourself, I'm a good person, we think it's only cutting us off from the being like doing things that bad people do, but really it's cutting us off from everything. We're seeing ourselves in a specific way, and so then we couldn't possibly be anything else. So any idea that we cling to, just one little idea of what we think we are, cuts us off from the possibility to be everything else, because I'm only this. And that comes with so many ideas, but it's even just the one that we cling to that cuts us off from being something else. So it's like moments of clarity allow us to shift and learn and grow and do things that our idea of ourselves wouldn't normally do. But we're all clinging so tightly to that it's very difficult for us to change and shift and mold with the times, especially even like having a different opinion on something. People deem that as a weakness, to change your mind about something. It's crazy how we've settled upon that. But yeah, it's the willingness to be, not to recognize that you're never what you think you are, allows you to tap into being everything and trying new things and doing things differently. But as long as you're clinging to one idea of you, going to cut you off from everything else.
Absolutely. This is something we actually kind of talked about in our relationship workshop. We had a relationship building workshop for anybody who's wondering. You can get it at dualisticunity.com. Obviously, my tongue is still hurting. But in this relationship workshop, we were very much talking about the fact that when you're trying to be something, what you're doing is you're setting yourself up for some serious hardship ahead, because not only are you trying to be something, so you're not being yourself, but eventually it's going to dawn on you that the person that likes you doesn't actually like you. They like the person you've been trying to be. If they like that person at all, more likely they won't, because they'll realize that person isn't real. And then you have all of that stress that goes into trying to be someone you're not. And so you don't even enjoy the relationship because you're not really in it. Just keep that in mind. It really is just about being yourself. And it doesn't mean anything about you. It doesn't mean anything about you. But we keep trying to get to this point where we know this person. And that's really the problem, right? When somebody changes their mind, they're like, I thought I knew your stance on this. It's like, things change. If you weren't trying to identify me as somebody in a certain category, so you didn't have to live in uncertainty, then this wouldn't be a problem. But the point is that you do want false certainty. You want to put me in a category so you know me, so you don't have to worry about it anymore. And you can move on with your life, because that's a sense of false comfort. Happens all the time. We do it all the time. We just want to know what people think. Your mind changes all the time. How do you want to know what other people are thinking? Their mind changes just as much as yours does. Everybody's changing all the time. What you're really looking for is just a sense of stability. What you're really looking for is a sense of control. What you're looking for is a sense of certainty. Like, this is what the world is. And it is very helpful to remember that no matter what your perspective of the world might be, that's not the world. Keep this in mind, especially when you start looking at, the atrocities in the world and the government and all of this stuff that's happening. Oh my God, we're all doomed. No, we're not. We're not. The system that is running all this is doomed. We're going to be okay, unless, again, you're holding on to the tiger's tail. At some point, that tiger's going to bite you.
Yeah, it's so interesting how often we want so much of that control, and control even in knowing like what someone thinks about you. You're like, oh, if I just know, then I'll be okay. Like I've interacted with people who, and I used to very much be like this as well. Like I was so concerned with what other people thought of me that I wanted to know what they thought of me. And so there's like this desire to then control the narrative in a way and control how they think about me, as if that's even possible. Like we think it's a possibility, and so we strive to do so. And it isn't. You can't change someone's mind. You can't even act in a way that guarantees anything out of anyone. We think, oh, I need to know what they're thinking of me, because then what? Well, then I can change. And if they don't like me, or if they do like me, I'll keep acting the same. If they don't like me, then I'll act different. And I'm like, okay, well, what if two people have completely different opinions of you? One person likes you and one person doesn't like you, and you're doing the same thing. Well, which do I like more? And it's like, okay, so what if it's two people you like, and one thinks one thing and one thinks another thing, and eventually it's going to come down to, well, shit, okay, I don't have control. I couldn't possibly ever know what everyone thinks about me. There's no way for me to control what they think about me. Might as well let go of my concern for what they think about me, because maybe it isn't so much on me. Maybe it's not even about me. Maybe they're just seeing me as another iteration of themselves. They're seeing me as a reflection of how they need to see reality based on how they think reality is. And so, and as you just said, like reality is never what you think it is. Your idea of the world isn't the reality of the world. It's such a limited perception, like that we settle upon. The world's fucking huge. 8 billion people. So many different things happening all the time that have nothing to do with the idea of you. Nothing to do whatsoever. Very, very little of what's happening in reality right now has to do with the idea of you. Very, very few people are thinking about the idea of you outside of you. And yet that's our entire reality, is that experience that we're having. But as we recognize, all of the things that are happening, the lack of ability to control anything that's happening, to control any narratives inside of anyone else's mind. It's like we drop our idea that we could control any of it, and there's freedom on the other side of that through the letting go of that desire. But we're always sort of settling upon that desire, settling upon the desire to control the narrative when it's not even possible. It's never been possible. There's no way to do it. But our mind, our brain thinks it can. It really thinks it can. And so it's always striving to. But as you let go of the idea that you ever possibly could, like, things get a lot lighter. You realize that people are dealing with their own shit. They're going through their own stuff. They're seeing you in the way that they see reality in a certain way, and you are an aspect of reality. And so therefore you are being seen in a way that they need to in order to reinforce their idea of reality. And so how could that ever possibly have anything to do with you?
Nice. Absolutely. I want to take a brief second here, and I'm going to switch directions on you after this, to mention two things. One, we released an episode of Community Topics last week that I'm rather happy about. I got to tell you, after we recorded that episode, I was just feeling very satisfied. I have to say, it's a good episode about dementia. Go and check it out. There are some surprising things in that episode, and I certainly learned a lot from it. Also, Dualistic Unity now has a LinkedIn page. So if you happen to be on LinkedIn, like Dualistic Unity, because if we can get to 150 people who follow our page, we can start live streaming these episodes on LinkedIn as well. So that'll be a lot of fun. So if you can do that, we'd really appreciate it. Andrew, I know last week you really wanted to talk about the Big Bang towards the end of the week, and we never really got a chance to do that. But we did start talking a little bit in terms of what the Big Bang was, in terms of it not necessarily being the beginning of linear time, but rather the creation of the perception of time in general. That all perceptions, as we've just said, which exist within everybody's awareness, came into being at the same time. But not just all perceptions of the person you just happen to be at the moment, all perceptions of being a person, whether it's a blade of grass or a squirrel or a squid or a human or a dolphin, all of those different variations of the observer and the observed all came into existence at the same moment. Now, I say at the same moment and came into existence, and that is incorrect. That is incorrect because it didn't come into existence. What is always is. All of these possibilities always exist, and reality is everything that could possibly be. That's what reality is. We experience different aspects of everything that could possibly be. So that all said, all of these moments, the moment that happened 2 seconds ago, the moment that's happening right now, the moments that are going to happen directly after, they all came into existence, or they all exist. And we have the experience of going from one to the other. But if that's true, then the moment you're going into next isn't necessarily the same, a moment that is connected to the physical universe that you just experienced. See, because each and every moment is its own universe. Each and every moment is its own variation of what could be. Now, that's just not its own variation of what could be physically, but its own variation of what could be consciously in terms of awareness as well. So not only are we shifting from reality to reality, one moment at a time, we're also shifting to greater and lesser degrees of unity from moment to moment to moment. And I think, because this, you'll find stuff like this online in terms of like the spiritual crowd, and they talk about shifting realities, which unfortunately comes often down to the perception of control. I'm just looking at this in terms of the recognition of what it is we're experiencing, because I think that changes a lot of what we actually do influence. The more you recognize what you are, the more influence you have just by being yourself, right? There's less unconscious behaviors that manifest and pull you back and forth. And if you look at reality being really an example of your divine unconscious behaviors, then as you start to flesh those out and deal with them, reality would change around you to reflect the changing mentality. And so if that's the case, then there really is no limitation on how much we can change. But it's really important, I think, to recognize that if this is the case, then right now, in this moment, you will always have a variation of this planet where we are entirely divided and heading towards Armageddon, and a variation of this planet where we are coming back together and turning the tide. Always going to have those possibilities. Always going to be there. Because everything that can exist must. So it really just comes down to, what do you want to embody, since you are everything?
I'm glad that we're getting back into this, because I've been chewing on it, and I posted it on my Instagram story a little bit about someone asked me what concepts you're still having difficulty digesting or something, and it's like, yeah, concepts, is a word, but yeah, the two things I said were the recognition of being alone, and the Big Bang not being the beginning of time, but the beginning of the perception of time. And so, as you were just saying, like each moment being its own reality is almost like each moment is the Big Bang happening. Like I'm almost starting to see the Big Bang as like just symbolic, like entirely symbolic in a sense of like, as much as there's an event that we look at, it's on the symbolic front, like the perception of division that comes with it. Like each and every moment we're like perceiving division. And so it's almost like the Big Bang being symbolic for the perception of division, the beginning of time, the perception of space, illusion of time, illusion of space, all that stuff that comes with perceived division in a reality that isn't inherently divided. Like the Big Bang is always happening in the sense of the symbolic notion of it, but also every moment that could ever be is always what is and could ever be. Like that's happening in each and every moment as well. It's not just one moment that they were all born into, because they were always those moments. There was no non-existence. Nothing came before it. So it's always been that, but we just, because we perceive time in a linear capacity and see it in a certain way, we think back, 13 billion years ago, this happened. Everything was born, but in eternity, in no division, in a lack of any division whatsoever, like that's just happening in each and every moment. Like that's happening here now, no differently. And so it has to be that mentality. And how much of that previous perception of a previous moment that wasn't actually a previous moment, because each moment is its own universe, are we bringing into each new universe? New, again, I'm using a lot of air quotes here, but each new universe, like how much are we bringing that mentality into it based on how we see things, how we see ourselves, all that stuff. It's like we're choosing perception of division as truth in each and every moment, in a sense, because we're bringing that perception into each future iteration of that moment through clinging to all the things that we cling to.
Oh, this one's tricky, isn't it? And this one fun, right? Because, okay, so this is the thing I keep coming back to, because science will tell you that whatever came the moment before the Big Bang was more energy than we could possibly fathom. and it all just came into being, and it's expressed after the Big Bang, right? See, I think that point that is more energy, right, that has more potential than anything else, is the point that is everything. All of these potential moments all exist at once in nothing and no time. And so each and every one of those potential moments exists within a story. Okay. And what I mean by a story is unity to duality and unity again, the full loop, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end, right? So each story is basically everything that could potentially exist in a certain timeline expressed. So an entire universe of history is what I'm saying. Each and every moment would exist within its own universe. Some moments would exist very early on in the universe because they're very basic and comprised of very simple elements. And then other variations would have to exist later in a timeline because they're the result of other variations leading up to that. Does that make sense? Like, in order for humanity to exist, right? Like, so our primate ancestors, for example, right? They existed because if they didn't, this variation wouldn't be possible. See? So they exist of necessity, as whatever follows us has to will exist or does exist, and we are the necessary precursor. So all of those variations and their necessary precursors all came into existence at the very same moment. Not even came into existence. Fuck, language is tough. They've always existed. It's just that we have the experience of them in sequential order. So our variation has the perception of being a certain way along that story, from the beginning to the end, to the creation of the universe, to the end of the universe, back to where it came from, right? This variation lies somewhere within that gray area. And so this is the experience that we're having. And of necessity, it makes sense about all the things that came before. But they were never before. This is four-dimensional time. This is what we were talking about, right? Like the past and the present are the same thing. They are the same object. It's just broken up over time. So if you were to take, let's just say, all of the potential moments that could possibly exist in this universe alone, just this universe, let's just look at the last 16 billion years, every moment that could possibly exist from every point of view that's ever lived in this universe over 16.4 billion years. Let's just take them all of them, remove time, and say that they all exist at once. And so now you've got this point of fluctuating perception. It's just moving, and it's all these different perceptions that existed over 16.4 billion years. All of them existing in here and now. Right? That's reality. What we experience is that stretched out in a way that makes sense experientially. Now, where it gets trippy is the fact that this universe is just one story. This universe is just one variation. There are infinite other variations of what this universe could be. And in each and every one of them, we are somewhere in the spectrum where it makes sense that there was something before and after. Because of course, in the same way that orange makes sense when you mix the two primary colors that make it.
So that thing you just expressed, that we're experiencing it stretched out, but if it's not stretched out, it's like that's like the feeling of being in the void, almost. Like
that's the feeling of being you.
And that's a lot. That's a lot to experience. And that's what I was trying to say. I kept saying like it was intense. It wasn't, there's no a preference or opinion. It was not like a good or a bad thing. It was just it felt like it was everything. And so that makes sense then. And we then experience that sort of stretched out because it's like palatable in a sense, but then I get, I understand with needing it to make sense. Like we're at a point now, and there was a shitload of evolution that got us to this point, but being here couldn't have been possible without all of the things leading up to here. But it's still just a story. Like, you can take that whole span of like going from single cell organism to multi-cell organism to fucking iteration human. But then it's like you can compress it all and it's all there. It's all in potential. And then we see it played out, but it couldn't, you can't be just go from single celled to human immediately. And I know in my head, I'm like, of course, why? Because like you need the process, but also why?
It's not that you need the process, it's that all variations exist. All shades of gray exist. So everything in between that cell to a human exists, right? Like they're all the same moment. They're just expressed in greater complexity, right? And so we look at it as one leads to the other, but the other, it's kind of like I was saying, like mixing two colors to make another color, right? Like they're the same thing. Nothing's changed. It's okay. So let's simplify it. Let's take the universe out of it. Let's just make it about Andrew. Andrew, right now, this moment, is a fully grown adult having a conversation in English over Zoom. In order for this variation to exist, okay, including the experience of having a belly button, eating, growing, living, because it's not just this moment, there's everything that's encompassed in the experience that you're having in this moment. All of that stuff, okay, necessitates a journey. So your birth must exist for you to be here. Right. This is why in the Nines, that one line at the beginning of the movie, The Nines, by the way, is a movie with Ryan Reynolds and Melissa McCarthy. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. He has a moment where he picks up the phone, he calls 911, and he's like, I don't have a belly button. I think I'm God. And it's because he has no beginning. See, there was nowhere he came from. He wasn't born, right? He's very much unborn and yet existing. And that's what we are. That's what we are at the end of the day. But we, by virtue of the variation that you're in, have variations that led to this in the same way that orange had variations that led to it.
Okay. And I totally, I'm never going to say totally get something, but I'm wrapping my head around it. But at the same point, like, and I know you've said this before, that it kind of blows your mind that things happen sequentially. And that's what I'm starting to wonder about too. Like, to me, it seems like there's almost an element of control in a weird sense, like not control really, but I don't know if you know what I'm saying, like
I do.
how
Try
it
this
goes
one.
in
Put
the
your finger up.
process.
Okay. Now let's just say your finger only exists in the ability to go this way or this way. This is the entirety of your finger's existence. Okay. So from right here, what's possible to your finger? One shade this way or one shade this way. Okay. Because of the variations of what could exist from this point. And then from here, one shade this way or one shade this way. So for the finger to come over here, all of the points from there to here exist in between. And I'm just traversing through them. But the only ones I can get to from here are the ones immediately to my left or my right. In the same way that the only moment you can experience next is the one that is the closest to the moment you're experiencing now.
Okay. So that makes sense. But also like, part of me is like, why can't you jump? But like,
I'm not saying you can't. I'm saying that our experience without awareness is that linear experience of going from one moment to the other, because we have a perception of time as linear because we're not responsible as the whole. So this is what I mean, is that I'm saying what we're experiencing. I'm not saying that's all we can experience. I'm not saying that's all that's possible either, but I think that it comes down to, again, the exploration of our role as the observer and the observed. And I don't think we've ever really cracked that nut. I don't think we've ever really explored that territory, because frankly, we're irresponsible and kind of petty.
yeah. Okay. So in this is like the idea of me. This is like Andrew, how I perceive myself, only Andrew, not connected to anything, blah, blah, blah. And so that is the extent of what I could be, because it's almost like my mind is limiting myself to this. But the reality is that I'm all of it all the time. So I'm here and also here, but I have the perception of me being here. So that's where it makes sense that it's like, there is no, now I'm here. Now I'm here. And there isn't that experience of the variations because I'm already everywhere. I just have the perception that I'm only right here. And so it limits my ability to tap into, that type of experience. And I'm only limited to, the one to the other. So, because then it's like fucking everything comes back into play. It's like you've been everything forever, like going back to everything being compressed, the timeline getting stretched out. And that's sort of our experience because we have a limited perception of ourselves. As it gets together, it's like you're here, but then, this here could be being a dog in 500 BC, and it's like that experience there is also here now. And as we drop the illusion that we're just this, then, things, telepathy, telekinesis, teleportation, time travel, as if that's like time's even real, come back, like they start making way more sense.
Absolutely. There's this movie that came out, I think it was in the 80s. It starred Christopher Reeve. I want to say Summersby, but I could be wrong. No, it's definitely not Summersby. Anyway, what happened was he had this idea that he could time travel. He was talking to a professor, and the professor theorized that if you could simply convince your awareness that you were in that time without any doubt whatsoever, you would be able to experience it. And so what he does is he goes out of his way to find this hotel in this city that's from the 1920s. They haven't updated any of the interior. Or he gets the room where nothing's been updated. It's still very much exactly as it was in the 20s. He goes out of his way to find an old suit and some shoes, and he goes out of his way to buy everything from this time period. And he sits in this room and he's convincing himself and he's going through it. And then he leaves the room, and sure enough, he's in the 20s. And he goes about experiencing this, and he falls in love with this woman. It's a really sad movie. And just as everything's starting to come together at the end, he reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a penny. And the penny was printed in the 80s. And he's reminded of the 80s, and he gets pulled right back to his old life, where he meets the old lady version of the woman he fell in love with. And she's like, come back to me. And he can't. And he can't. Super sad movie, but fucking great concept. Great concept.
Fuck, that's sad. Damn, I'm like about to start tearing up right here just from a little 2-minute description of it. But oh man, like that, it makes sense. And there's the there was that experiment where they took a bunch of old guys and put them back into took them into sort of like a house in the woods and made everything like it was when they were 20 years old. And like, basically, long story short, all their health markers improved. Like they all had certain things, ailments, like issues, and all of a sudden they didn't anymore. Spending a week in this house. And as they got back into their past day-to-day society, it all started, slowly coming back, but they were able to tap into that. And so that's, I see as very similar to that, but it makes sense, but it needs to be that without a shadow of a doubt sort of thing. And I think because even with me now, there's still all sorts of, doubts that'll come up. And that's the practice and letting go of that. Like Jesus walking on water. Why did you become separate? Like that sort of thing. And even if he did say, why do you doubt? Like it's still saying, why do you doubt that you're everything? And it has to be that, like, without a shadow of a doubt, which, yeah, I mean, I'm definitely closer to that, but because it makes sense. But it's such, that fucking ego idea of yourself just keeps it. That's always doing work too. That's always working. But yeah, fuck. Ooh.
It's funny. Terrence McKenna, he was giving a speech once, and he was talking about how the part of you that becomes afraid in psychedelics is your ego, right? It's your ego going, no, I don't want to do that at all. But then you go through these stages as you start to recognize more and more. And at first, it's very much like, oh, it's just the drugs, that kind of thing. But then later on, he was starting to say that your ego kind of taps in, and all of a sudden the fear is that you're crazy. That's it. Like, oh, you're crazy. Right. And then after that, it's, oh, maybe you're dying. That's another fear of your ego, none of which is the case, right? Like, what we're talking about is reality, the experience of reality, but we're talking about it in a way that only sounds crazy because of our perception of the universe and because of our dominant perception of ourselves as being human beings on a planet in a certain period of time. All of which is true and yet not at the same time. And this is where quantum physics is really having difficulty with this. But it makes sense when you look at like entanglement, right? The fact that you can have two things at the opposite end of the universe, and that they will, in the exact same moment, interact. Well, why? Well, because time doesn't exist. See, they're entangled because they're the same reality. So this opens up a lot of questions regarding time travel, teleportation, all of that fun stuff, including the ability to change our own physiology. This is why the research they're doing right now in terms of, so they found within our DNA, basically an anti-aging mechanism that exists, where basically they can reset your DNA to act as if it was just recently born. And so they're not adding anything, they're just activating what's already there. And they've been experimenting with blind mice. And what they've done is they've actually activated this aspect of their DNA in their eyes and watched their eyes regrow to actually heal as if they were new eyes. And this is something that they're experimenting with right now. And they're going into studies with non-human primates, because while they're only using it on the eyes at the moment, it could be used anywhere. So immediately, and I know every single person who's terrified of aging is like, woo, woo, because they're afraid of dying at the end of the day. But I could give two shits. Like, I'm 43. I like the idea of aging. But my point is this: if our DNA remembers what it is to be timeless, then that means there's an aspect of us that's timeless.
And that makes me very, very curious. Like, and with the quantum entanglement too, like it's pointing to that recognition. There's no disconnect between anything. And so, like, there are aspects of us that know this deep down. And that's like I was saying earlier, like deep down, we all know this reality, that we are reality. And there's lots of ways to avoid that recognition. But it's like, if our DNA can tap into that, like, what's limiting me from tapping into that way more frequently? Like, and it really is that identity, the idea that we are what we think we are. And that's it. And there's not like because with the egotistical mentality, like there's a part of me that wants a way to do it in a way, like I got to do it in a certain way, and it's not that. Like, there's not a step-by-step sort of thing. It's like, exactly. I was just about to, it was like, it's right now. Like, it is it right now. There's nowhere to get. There's not a step-by-step process to take. As soon as you think there is, it's taking you further from it. Every step-by-step is walking you further from it, because it's you.
And you're
here
already
now.
doing it.
Right?
That's it.
Yeah.
You're already doing it by virtue of what you are. It's what you've always been doing. This is why there's I'm not sure which tribe in Africa it is, but I remember running across this years ago. Their perspective is that we are actually travelers through space and time, and that we got basically trapped by this other race, and they basically just created a reality that we believed, and it got us stuck because we're like, this is reality, and we lost our ability to travel through space and time as a result. Now, the only thing I would say is that it wasn't another race. I would say it's just by virtue of what we are, right? Because this is the thing. Somebody was looking at that video from 2005. They're like, I'm curious, is anything different between what you say here and how you see things now? And there's only one difference. In that video, I say that we chose to come here to avoid being reality, that we chose to create this life to avoid being God. And that is not the case. That is not the case. All of this exists by virtue of what we are. It's not that we chose to create it. It has to exist because of everything that we are. Always, always. It's just where we get caught in it. And there are so many variations that we get caught up in it. And thankfully, because existence is beautiful in some ways. We have a quick question here. Andrew, I know you want to get into this a little bit deeper, but I'm just going to say that we have a Patreon call in about a half hour. If anybody would like to join us, do patreon.com/dualistic unity. We're going to be chatting on tier 2 for an hour and a half, and then we're going to have a 2-hour tier 3 chat after that, where we're going to talk about some exciting news about our retreat schedule for 2024. So if anybody would like to join us there, we would love to chat with you. Andrew, there's so much to this. I've been chewing on this for 20 years. And so I'm very excited that this is where we are in this conversation. I'm also very excited for the retreat that's coming up in 12 days, because in that retreat, this is what I'd like to explore in greater detail, because I've been chewing on this for a long time and nobody wants to have this conversation until I finally stopped looking for other people to have it so I could have it with myself. And now I feel like I don't know, I've got my grounding enough where it's like, let's have this conversation, right? Because it's a great conversation, so long as you don't get caught up in the need for control, which you identified. That's really the only danger. It's kind of like the idea of telekinesis. I want to move that. So you're already moving everything. So just take that in. But we do have a question here, and I know we only have about 12 minutes left, so I wanted to address them quickly. Would you say that your socioeconomic life now and growing up made it easier for you to accept the philosophies that you speak about? So I want to mention this because I think you're probably newish to the podcast. Do check out season 1 for sure. What makes Dualistic Unity, I think, so very useful is the fact that Andrew and I come from stunningly different backgrounds. So Andrew's socioeconomic status growing up, or the world that he lived with or lived in from birth and onward, is about as starkly different from mine as you could possibly imagine. So no, I really don't think it has anything to do with the environment that we grew up within, so much as our willingness to make the most of the moments that we experience.
Yeah, we've talked about this before. I think, was that in the community topics, like unity and boundaries? Was that the one?
Could be.
We got into that. I think it might have been, because I think we talked about how we come at it from, or like came at it from different approaches. Because when I sort of woke up, it was like the recognition that I'm not, the past, the story, the idea of Andrew, but it was months and months before I recognized that meant, without that being there, then I'm everything. I'm not limited to this. Whereas you came at it from like, both ends at once, basically, but that you are the extent of your experience, like the experience that you're having is it. So everyone is within your mind and comes from that. And so within that, anyway, what I'm getting to is like, we talked about, I don't remember what number it was, but it's unity and boundaries. We have a YouTube playlist that sorts through all of them, and then you can just search it on a podcast platform. But I think we talked about how starkly different our backgrounds are, and how there's reasons on both ends why you wouldn't wake up. Like there's, as much as people can point to my background being like, more privileged, comfortable background, cohesive family that, great parents growing up that are, whatever they want to point to. It's like, there's a lot of reasons not to wake up in that situation. I think that people don't recognize because there is, I think, a piece that makes it easy to dip your toe in almost with that. Like when there aren't so many physical, well, it's interesting because like when there aren't so many physical concerns of like survival, like a lot of what you went through growing up is just like literally living, making it through the week and continuing to breathe. Versus when you don't have to be so concerned with all of those things, when most of that's, taken care of. You don't have to think so much about what your next meal is going to be. Like there isn't that aspect that is dealing with that. But in both ends, there is the ability for the idea of yourself to overtake your reality. I know a lot of people, friends, family, who don't have to think about where their next meal is coming from. And they're suffering more than a lot of people I know who are not in as what would society would deem as great of a situation, because they have the space. And in that space, there is the ability to explore the nature of reality, certainly, but there's an aspect of that that's always available, but there's also an aspect of your idea of yourself just running rampant through your reality. And so there are reasons on every end of every spectrum that there are opportunities to recognize that you're not what you think, but there are also reasons to hold on to what you think you are. We see that with people with a shitload of money. Like, why would they let go of the idea of themselves? It's where all of their value is derived from. And so there is a unwillingness to let go. But that being said, it's easier to, get on into the spiritual side of things and sort of build that spiritual ego. I think there's a ability to do so, but you get to a point where you start letting go of the idea of yourself that the spiritual guru is not doing so much, that isn't as egotistically rewarding. Like you can derive a lot of benefits from the egotistical side of spirituality and maintain that, and having comforts in your life maybe make that easier. But if you have those comforts, you wouldn't want to. There's a lot of people who don't want to question those, and so there's great reasons to not question everything, including where your comforts come from. That you get to a point that that doesn't matter. If anything, having comforts makes that harder to question, and you butt up with like certain things, and you're like, fuck, I gotta let go of that too on this path. And it doesn't, there's nothing saying that you have to, but if you want to continue to explore, you have to. So yeah, that's I don't know. There are sides to every spectrum that are going to give opportunities to wake up and be reasons not to, no matter where you look.
See, it's interesting because at the deep end of this spectrum, everybody has the exact same challenge. At the deep end, are you willing to be everything? At the deep end, it's always the same challenge. It doesn't matter how many roads you take to get to it. That's the line. And it's hard. It's hard to get to that point, regardless of where you're coming from. Either you are trying to survive or you're trying to identify. Each one is difficult to put your attention away from. Each one. We've had a couple of questions here regarding mindfulness and meditation, and how do I get past the voice in my head or the need to, keep track of the dates, all that stuff. Just keep in mind, it's a journey. It's a journey. In other words, there's no one insight where you're just going to be like, aha, I don't have to listen to my thoughts. And you won't anymore. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is little bit by little bit, you're going to have insights where you're like, oh shit, that's not the truth. And you won't take it so seriously. And then after months and years of having insights and recognizing that your brain is not producing the truth, you'll just stop taking it so seriously. And you won't hear the voice in your head as much. It's not that it's not there, it's just that it's not you. And so you're not giving it the same level of attention. Same with being in the present. You are the present. Doesn't matter if you're thinking about future dates, you're still the present. So it really just comes down to how much are you dwelling on those future dates. It's one thing to know you have an appointment coming. It's another thing to worry about it, be anxious about it, judge yourself for not being ready for it, all that other stuff. See what I'm saying? You are the present. Keep it light and everything else gets easier. It doesn't mean you can't contemplate time. It's just how invested are you in that time, meaning something.
Yeah, no, there's and even in the statement, like a journey to becoming more present, if you cling to that journey super tightly, you're never getting anywhere. And I know words suck a lot of times, but there is an underlying desire there that takes you further from it. Like I want to be more present, and like that desire, and that necessitates the future in a way. Like you're creating a narrative about the future and how you want it to be, hoping there's a way for you to force that to happen, in a way, control that outcome into reality. And it's just being where you're at, like that idea of presence that we cling to is something that happens. It's not somewhere that we get to. It's just where we're always at. But thinking that you're not is another thing, another illusion that takes you out of it. So it's recognizing that you're already there. And this kind of brings me back, and I know we're going to get back into it in the Patreon calls, but the recognition that you're already doing it. You're already doing all that shit. And so even, it's funny, like even the perspective of me thinking that, oh, the idea of me is keeping me from doing certain things. It's like the idea of me is keeping me from recognizing that I'm already doing all of these things. It's not keeping me from doing it. It's keeping me from recognizing that I already am doing it. And I think that's kind of similar to being present. Like you're already present all the time, everywhere. But yeah.
Oh, this is going to be a good Patreon call. I love Sundays on Patreon. I have to admit, they are some of our best conversations for sure, because we wind up here after 2 days off and then we just get into it and we have to eventually stop and take a break. And then we have another another breather to kind of contemplate everything that we just rambled in this episode. So if you can join us on Patreon, we would love to see you. It's definitely worth it. You get to talk to us quite a bit. Tier 3 is actually going to get to vote on our movie reviews moving forward. So we're going to give them a list of movies and they're going to get to vote on which movie we're going to review next. We're probably going to start that going into season 5 very shortly, because I already have a movie in mind for this week based on the conversation that we've been having, which is, of course, The Butterfly Effect. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This has been a blast. Do join us tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern time, here on Twitch or YouTube Live. And we're going to have another episode of Raw. And then on Tuesday, I believe this is the call-in show this week. So that's exciting. Anybody who would like to join, we're going to provide the link during the call-in show, 6 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday. And you can join us on the episode for 10 or 15 minutes, ask a question, air a grievance, whatever it is you'd like to do. We'd love to see you. So thanks so much for joining us today. I'll pass it to Andrew to wrap us up, and we'll see you on Patreon shortly.
Yeah, it's been a blast of a call. I'm excited to get into that recognition. I'm already doing it. Already doing everything, but not Andrew. So anyway, I appreciate everyone for tuning in. Appreciate all the comments on the Twitch stream. If you haven't hopped into the Twitch and you're watching this after the fact, do it. Yeah, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday on Twitch, different times. You can get the schedule on the website, and look forward to talking to some of you very soon.